My name is Altin Sencalar. I am a jazz trombonist, as well as I play euphonium, and I also teach both of those instruments to students. And today I'm here to talk about implementing jazz vocabulary into your playing. So I have a scenario. It's a little bit silly, and it's not in the context of music, but that's good. Why? Because it forces us to think about other things besides talking to other musicians. It forces us to think about communication in a different way. So, have you ever imagined, or have you ever been in a foreign country and someone speaks the native language to you? So, like, I know for me, I went to Europe last summer, and I had no clue what people were saying. So that means I wasn't versed in the vocabulary, right? So let's continue reading. If you don't understand the language, then how do you communicate? Large hand gestures, possibly Google Translate with poor diction, slow speaking to the person without speaking the language they speak, but instead using your language. So these are all examples of how to get mixed up when speaking to somebody else. So how does this relate to music or jazz? So when playing in the jazz idiom or genre, improvisation is a huge part of the music. Being able to improvise has an uncertainty for some students because of the improvisation aspect of the musical language. So, and I know I'm reading this off the board, but I also want you to take a look at how I've written this visually. Notice the word language is bolded and underlined. Why is that? Well, musical language is a commonality that all musicians can understand. Jazz language and/or vocabulary is something that is specific to jazz musicians. So we all have friends, hopefully, who are not musicians, to keep our sanity there. Many non-musicians or non-classically trained people also have a large music commonality, right? The hottest pop song for many people is the musical language for people who may not be classically trained, but they all know the same lyrics. So I know my parents, they all love Rock You Like a Hurricane, which was huge. And if you didn't know that, man, you jive, right? But that's how they knew that they were on the same page musically. Same thing with jazz musicians. So this all applies to jazz. So what? Well, having common musical language is important. This is how we communicate without using words as instrumental jazz musicians, right? Whenever you're on the bandstand, if you want to communicate something, you may play something at somebody versus hey, because you don't want to interrupt the music. A great example of this is when somebody plays a lick or a piece of vocabulary that you and your musical ear recognizes. There's a moment of commonality now between the two people, or more, depending on if your rhythm section is hip. And now you have a common ground on the bandstand. That's even greater because now there's a connection. An even better example will be playing parts of a very famous transcription that many people know and using materials such as certain lines, 2/5 resolutions, and other vocabulary such as rhythmic, harmonic, and other stuff. This can be achieved through doing your homework and research. So what is homework and research in jazz? Well, we, as 21st century musicians, have the privilege to be able to listen to the 20th century music. Not many people can say that they can listen to the original source. So this is our bread and butter, or our homework, or our research, right? So doing research in music is listening to the recordings that are well respected by many and provide you with content on whatever music it is that you're researching. Using vocabulary, now here's the accolades to all of this. Using vocabulary in your playing adds depth to your sound, such as time placement, clarity, maturity, citation of great studying of the jazz masters, and much more. For example, if I'm looking for more ideas in trombone playing that is clear and concise with bebop, I look up my man, the great J.J. Johnson. But how do I know who to look up? Well, you ask your teachers, right? Teachers are there to help you and give you tools, and give you the tools needed to advance your playing and your mind. So we're gonna now move on to the actual sheet that I have, and I see that we have a couple of participants here. But before we get to that, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
So you said that vocabulary and playing stuff that other people have played is cool, but Isn't that stealing?
So that's a great question. So there's this. There's a couple of articles out here about this, especially with like copyright. But plagiarism, I should say, in jazz music is actually like paying homage to the musician. Why? Well, first off, we're not the innovators of the music or the pioneers. The jazz greats who we study and transcribe are. This is how you add depth and get their perspective, which then adds to yours. I don't know if you've ever heard this, like these three things, but it's listen, imitate, innovate. And I'm sure there's something else in there, but it's slipping me right now. But those three are really important. Listen, imitate, innovate. So listening and imitating go hand in hand with your transcriptions, right? Same thing with jazz vocabulary. So if I were to play you this, you'd say, okay, that's just like a couple of notes. Like, what does that have to do with me? Well, I can cite that material. This is what doing your research and homework is in jazz. That is from Woody Shaw's There Never Be Another You off the album Solid. But you wouldn't know that yet until somebody would hip you to that or, point you in that direction, correct? Right. So, yes, stealing or plagiarizing music as far as jazz improvisation is a go. Now, stealing somebody else's melody, that's a completely different story. But as far as like paying respect and or homage to the jazz masters, that is how you communicate effectively on the bandstand. Why? Because everybody or many jazz musicians who listen to the same respected amount of musicians as you do now have that commonality and you're now in each other's ear. This is how you effectively communicate on the bandstand, as I was talking about earlier. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
How do you get better at how do you like take? How do you know what to take? How do you know what's like good or not?
So that's an excellent question. So if I were to dissect a transcription or analyze it, write it down, and put all the chord changes above it, you now have a visual map of how they approach chords, right?
Yeah.
So how people approach chords or like whatever you're trying to get into is a great way for you to study that musician or that particular solo. So, question. So like say you're listening to a transcription and you hear this lick. So, for me, that was like, oh man, I gotta cop that, but where can I put it? Well, I got that lick from that same Woody Shaw album, and it was at the end of There Never Be Another You. So I analyze it and compare it to the chord changes. So, okay, it doesn't line up. So what do? Well, you look at the notes that are there and make it into the chord that he's implying simply by analyzing each note and what he's trying to imply, right? We've all taken theory here, correct? Great. So because of your theory knowledge, you know how to analyze and put it with something. And then what you do is you put it on trial runs with either an Aebersold track or your friends or an iReal Pro, and you do trial and error. And so this applies to everything that you may find interesting in a transcription. So I have a sheet here with some vocabulary that I use and I've also heard. And now we're going to try and get this, and exchange these ideas by playing with one another. So would you mind coming up here, Nathan, and playing alongside me?
Sure.
So I would love if you could accompany me on some of these jazz vocabulary lines and playing. So let's look at the first lick. So can everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
So I have labeled a 2-5-1 to B flat major. So everybody knows what the 2-5-1 is, right? So we have a minor 2, which is a predominant, to dominant functioning chord, which is F7, which is the 5, and then to the tonic, which is a major 1, or in other cases it can be minor 1 or 6 or 3. So I really like relating harmony to like tonal harmony from your theory classes. Why? And why is that? Because some people may not be that fast. So it's really important that we still make this an inclusion sort of music, so that way people can understand what's going on. Okay? So let's just take it about right here. Ba boo ba dee da doo ba doo 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 dee doo ba. Okay? And I would love if you could just play the chords with me for this one. A 1, a 2, a 1, a 2, a 3. So, so now let me ask you, what did you hear in that line?
The harmony seemed to move. Your line seemed to move with what I was doing.
Right. So my next question to you is: there's some like inharmonic. There's some notes that really don't belong to those chords. What do you think those are doing there?
It looks like they're going to other things, other places.
Okay. So let me hip you to this. So how many of you listen to bebop music? All of you should be raising your hand. Public shame of bebop, my favorite. But this is something that's really important. In jazz improvisation, and specifically bebop, there's a lot of chromatic motion which adds to the line's shape or motion. Does that make sense? So I have a B natural to D to G sharp. Now we see how this G sharp resolves up to the A, right? It's a leading tone. But now these two notes are not in that C minor chord, so what are they doing? This is what we call a surrounding of the tonic, because it goes below, up, and then lands on the tonic, right? Okay, so this is really important whenever you study these pieces of vocab. So now, Nathan, I'd love if you could play this with me, and I'll outline the chords, okay?
Do you want me to play the line or the chords?
I'd love for you to play the melody.
Okay.
1, a 2, a 1, a 2, a 3. Okay, so do you notice now how that, like under your fingers, it makes a lot of sense now, right?
Mm-hmm.
In relationship to bebop. So now let's try a different approach. So this is resolving to what of this chord?
It looks like the tonic.
Right. So you wouldn't want to resolve to the tonic every single time. This is where we add variation in your playing and your improvisation approaches. So how many of you know what like upper extensions are? So upper extensions are what is above the seventh of a chord. So for example, a 9 or a sharp 11 on a major or dominant chord, or an 11, natural 11 on a minor chord, or a 13 or a flat 13, stuff like that. This is what goes above the seventh, okay? So let's look at this very last line. So notice the chords are a little bit different too. So does anybody know what this A7 is doing there?
Is it what you're talking about before? How it looks like it's chromatically going to the A flat?
It is.
Like with the leading tone in the last one.
Exactly. So, question for you. Does everybody, or not just you, the class, does everybody know what a tritone sub is? Do you know what a tritone sub is?
It's, well, a tritone is like, it's an interval between, so it's like an augmented fourth. So I guess a tritone sub would be like if you put the chord off the augmented fourth. Is that a tritone sub?
So, that's a really good description. But here's something even simpler.
Okay.
So, if we were doing a 2-5-1 to A flat major, what would the 5 chord be?
2-5. A major? A flat major, you said.
Yeah, but what would the 5 chord be of A flat?
The E flat.
Great. So what's a tritone away?
A.
Great. So now, because we have to keep that as a dominant functioning chord, that's now an A7 sharp 11. But now, here's how we get to the resolution part. So that's like one way to think about it, but now here's the other way. Notice the root motion, B flat, A to A flat. That is as smooth as you can be whenever it comes to resolving a chord, chromatically going down. Okay? So, imagine that E flat being, imagine that A7 sharp 11 being an E flat 7 sharp 11. So what do? We just reverse them. Or, here's the other way. I'm giving you a lot of examples. the third and seventh of E flat 7 is G and D flat. Now, inharmonically, D flat is also C sharp. So, what we do is we now switch those. So now C sharp or D flat is the third and G is the seventh. And what do those two chord tones belong to? A7, which is a tritonal way. And it works for every single sort of chord whenever you do this. And coincidentally, it's now smoother voice leading. So I'm gonna try and push through a little bit on this. So Nathan, let's try and play this line together. Okay?
J.
Yes, J. And then I'm gonna get one more person up here to play I. Okay? 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. You wanna try that one more time?
Sure.
Cool. 1. Actually, we'll take it a little bit slower. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now I'm gonna play the line, and can you play the chords? 1, 2, 3. So now, do we see what it's resolving to? We're resolving to the sharp 11 of A flat major, simply by playing the sharp 11 before it and resolving down by half step. So this is something for you to study and take in all 12 keys. Okay, real quick, let's get one more person up here. And we're going to do letter I. And now we're going to be resolving to the major 7th of the chord. Thank you, Nathan. Hello, Chris. So, I have a special sheet just for you. Bass trombone.
Oh. So we're playing the letter I?
Yes, we were playing letter I. And so, I'm going to play the chords, and you're going to play the line.
Okay.
And we're going to see how this now resolves on a different beat and resolves on a different note of the chord. So, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we resolved on beat 3 of that 5 chord, but we're still keeping the third. Now, have we all heard about resolving 3s and 7s?
Yeah.
Okay, so resolving the third to a 7th is a half step, or staying on the 3rd and 7th is the same thing as playing the 3rd on C7 and playing this major 7 on this F major 7. And this is how we anticipate, right?
Okay.
Okay, so let's do it one more time. Okay?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. So now there's tension and release.
Okay.
That's really cool, right? Because now this is adding even more depth, maturity, clarity, and time placement. Because now you're very aware of whenever you want to resolve instead of just like, okay, well the lick is done, right? I'm sure we've all been into that. So thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
So let's just wrap this up really quick. So implementing jazz vocabulary, as you heard, creates inner motion, creates clarity, creates maturity, creates time placement of resolution, and adds much more to your playing as far as having content whenever you play over changes. And so like these licks that I wrote out for you all to look at is really important for you to transpose into different keys, so that way you have even more in your forever bag of jazz vocabulary licks, right? So I want to say thank you to everybody who came out and listened to this, and I hope that you all got something out of this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me or drop a comment. Thank you so much.